Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. This is the second video I'm making on long-term trend analysis, looking at astrological cycles. Let's see what we're going to cover during this video. As part of our long-term trend analysis, in the first video, we reviewed the previous stock market crashes and tried to draw correlations to astrological events that were happening primarily with the outer planets and the lunar nodes. In this video, I'll attempt to demonstrate the 18-year lunar node cycle and its link to what I refer to as a primary cycle in the financial market and generally the economy of I would say pretty much all countries in the world. Obviously, when you're looking at individual commodities or stock markets, there may be different biases within them. In my analysis, I'm focusing on the FTSE 100, the leading UK stock index, which consists of the top 100 companies in the country. But you can apply all the information I'm providing to the US stock market and other countries around the world just to test the theory out. I'll go on to then look at a secondary cycle that's taking place within that primary cycle, and the secondary cycle is a planetary pair that are creating a harmonic, and I refer to it as the Saturn-Uranus harmonics. And finally, we'll, having looked at previous trends and linking them to the primary and secondary cycles, I will go on to give you my own personal long-term forecasts. Now, before we get into go any further, I just want to describe the difference in terminology. When I use the word forecast, I'm doing so by looking at previous trends, trying to prove a trend, and then apply that, and that's when I use the word forecast, as opposed to a prediction, which doesn't necessarily have any links to prior trends. A prediction is more of an inspiration that comes to an individual when they get a gut feeling or use their sixth sense as to what they believe will happen. A forecast is a little bit more analytical in so much as you have to look at previous trends. So, identifying cycle market crests and troughs. So, in the first video, we went through this graph, this graphical ephemeris. I explained what the different lines represent. I'll give you a very brief overview. This dark blue line is the FTSE 100 index, and traveling through time from 1984 all the way up to 2020. The blue prices on the side show you where the index was trading at, and the other lines each represent one of the outer planets and the lunar nodes that are traveling through time, and this is the graphical ephemeris in the backdrop of the FTSE 100. We can see that all the troughs were marked out. The major troughs have been marked out as 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we've experienced the fifth one, or what may be the fifth one. In the beginning of 2020, 23rd of March, we saw a low that is yet to be labeled, because we believe that was an anomaly and that there will be a bigger trough to follow. In much the same way, the market crests have been labeled alphabetically A, B, C, and D. Let's go forward to the next graph. Now, in this graph, I've just focused in on the lunar cycles. And I'm looking at just a north node, sometimes referred to as the head of the dragon. Its glyph is shown here. In 1984, it started its transit through Gemini, and you can see on this graph I'm showing the fourth harmonic. So every 30 degrees it will change signs. So it then moved into Taurus, Aries, Pisces, and I've marked out the period that the lunar nodes move into Aquarius in red. And this is based on a book in a book written by Louise McWhirter. It's called McWhirter's Theory of Stock Market Forecasting. In that book, she looks at the market movements in the US stocks for a period of about 200 years. And she draws a strong correlation to the movement of the lunar nodes transiting the different signs of the zodiac. She explains that predominantly there's a market crash that happens when the lunar nodes are transiting Aquarius. And similarly, as it goes through the opposite sign in the zodiac, which is Leo, the markets tend to peak and you get a market crest. So what I've done is through this period that I've drawn the graph for the FTSE 100, I have marked out in red all the points in which the lunar nodes are moving through Aquarius. The North Node is moving through Aquarius. So you can see the first transit of the North Node into Aquarius was around 1988, 1989, and it finished in 1990. And the speed at which the lunar nodes move is about approximately an 18-year cycle. So 18 years later, around the beginning of 2008, late 2007, the lunar node entered Aquarius again, coming out towards the end of 2009. And the next time we know the lunar node will be going into Aquarius, it is approximately in 2026, coming out in 2027. So, what have the markets done during those periods and transits through Aquarius? Well, we can see our market trough marked as 2 occurred during the North Node's transit of Aquarius, and the market trough in 2008 and 9, shown as number 4, also occurred in that period. So I've marked these 2 troughs in green just to show that we've explained them, and we're yet to explain this first one and this third one. Similarly, when the North Node goes through Leo, I've shown the periods where it has passed through Leo, so 1998 to the beginning of 2000. The North Node was transiting Leo. We can see the market peaked at that time, and that's shown by B and marked in green. And then 18 years later, in 2017, 18, all the way through to 2019, we had another market crest shown here by D, that's marked in green. So the greens are saying this is what we expected to happen, and that's what has happened. So we're happy with the explanation for these troughs and peaks. You can see the red line is showing you the trend line, and also the support line, and that's an 18-year period shown by this line. Similarly, there's an 18-year period as a resistant line across the top between the peaks. So there's a general trend upward through time for the FTSE 100. If you look at different markets, the gradients may be greater or less, a lower gradient, depending on how fast that economy is growing through time. Why Aquarius and why Leo? Well, Leo is traditionally the sign of wealth, gold, kings. It represents the 1% of the population which control, and some people say 10% of the population, which control 90% of the world's wealth. So it's elite of the world represented by Leo. And on the opposite side, Aquarius represents the masses, the 90% of the population, which only have control of 10% of the wealth of the world. Generally, Aquarius is associated to revolutions, uprisings, where the masses come together and there is a movement, there is a complaint, and there is a revolt. Whereas Leo is a wealth sign, one of luxury, one of risk-taking, and it's also represented by times of joy, partying, drinking, eating, exuberance. So as a North Node hits those signs, the energy of those signs are essentially activated, and we can see a general trend of that in the stock markets. Now, what I've done here is just drawn a sine wave with an upward bias going through time, and the reason for that is to say, well, can I explain the movement of the FTSE 100 with this sine wave? If I can, from 2020 onwards, this is what I would forecast the market to do. We should be expecting a major cycle trough at 0.6, and all the forecasts are in yellow. I haven't explained this one yet, but just focusing on this one, 0.6 is going to be a major cycle trough, which we're expecting in 2026 to 2027. Generally, it's easier just to say 2027 plus or minus 1 year, because the orb of the trough happening can be quite wide. Now, just visually, we can see that this black trend line it does have a strong correlation to the blue line for the FTSE 100, especially for the points marked circled in green. But there are anomalies. We can see 0.3 and the crest C here don't fit in too well with our trend line here. And the first crest we had up here and the trough here don't necessarily get explained by this trend line either, although there's a much stronger correlation than the one we're seeing here, which is negatively correlated. So is there something else at play? So that's why I call the lunar cycle a primary cycle, because the major trend is shown by this sine wave, but there does appear to be a secondary cycle happening within it. What is that? Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, Saturn and Uranus are a pair of planets, and the way their harmonics work is every time there's a conjunction between the two planets, when they're at 0 degrees from our perspective on Earth, that is one hard aspect, and then the next time they form another hard aspect of 90 degrees, the first waxing square, that's a second hard aspect, and there's an opposition at 180, and then a waning square at 270. This can be seen in the ephemeris if we look at Saturn and Aquarius and just follow the lines to see when the two actually meet or get very close to meeting. So if I zoom in on the first instance, you will notice the two lines meet at that point there. if we zoom out, what I've done is marked the point at which they meet in this red orb, starting at the end of 1987. And because of their, from our perspective on Earth, we observe a retrograde movement every year, and that's why you get this wave as opposed to a straight line like we do with the lunar nodes. Each movement upwards through the ephemeris shows a retrograde period. Because of the retrograde movement of the two planets and the fact that Saturn is moving through the zodiac at a lot higher velocity than Uranus, they meet several times, and so there's an orb at which the two planets are going conjunct. And I've shown this orb. You can see they met there once, and they go up above and then come back and they hit there again, and then there's a third meeting there. So I've shown this orb by marking the map in red. The two planets continue their movement, Saturn moving at a much higher gradient than Uranus, and they meet again at this point here in 1999. There's a second and third conjunction, and then they get very close to a conjunction at this point towards the end of 2000. So I've actually brought the orb out, because when they're that close to a 90-degree aspect, the effects of that hard aspect will still come into play. The two planets do have quite a wide orb, so when the orbs come in close to each other, it will act as if the two planets have met. So just be wary of that. I don't necessarily have to start the line exactly where they meet. This red orb can be pushed out a little bit to the first quarter of 1999 to the beginning of 2001. And the next time the planets meet is the end of 2008 to the middle of 2010. And now, if we look at the troughs we had, what we would generally expect is when these two planets are in hard aspect, we would expect the markets to drop down and fall. But usually, before they go into a hard aspect, they will usually be in a harmonious aspect of 60 degrees or 120, depending on where they are on the cycle. Now, the 120 aspect is the best aspect for them to have. The market will surge during that period, and the 60 is also very good. The market will generally go up, so we can see that before the red lines, the red periods that I've marked out, there's generally an increase, and that increase in the market would be due to the fact that Uranus and Saturn are in a very positive aspect, and then you can see a sharp drop happening. So we can explain that sharp drop and increase now, and because in 2000, we know as soon as we were in that period, the sharp drop followed it. So the increase didn't happen necessarily just before it. It did happen during that time, whilst the lunar nodes were in Leo as well, the North Node, and then followed by a sharp drop. Then again, in this period, we can see there was an increase, a positive aspect between the two planets happening at point C. A crest forms, followed by a sharp fall. So, going to the next slide, I've tried to put the movement of the lunar nodes and the harmonics between Saturn and Uranus all on one chart together. And what conclusions can we draw from it? Well, I'm now happy that I can explain pretty much all of these troughs and all of the crests as well. So if I, using that same theory, if I try to project it forward, what can we expect to happen beyond 2020? Now, if you remember, in previous forecasts I'd written, I'd mentioned end of 2019, beginning of 2020 was a period that we may start having recessionary energies in the markets. Why did I think that? Well, the North Node had peaked at around 2018-19, so we knew we were now on the downturn side of the curve, although that's an 8-year period, so we wouldn't necessarily expect a low until we reach 2026, 2027. So why was I expecting something in 2020? And the reason was, if you look at the movement of Saturn here, it's a little bit difficult to see. Saturn gets very close to a 90-degree aspect with Uranus, a blue line. Let me see if I can zoom that for you a little bit. I'll zoom it so you can see the dates as well. Here we go. So you can see Saturn it's making its way across the chart, enters Capricorn it enters Aquarius at this point in 2021, and the first conjunction will happen very early in February 2021. But if you look at this point here, Saturn went into Aquarius in 2020 and got very close to a 90-degree aspect with Uranus, which is in Taurus. And we can see the market took a big fall during that period as well, in March 2020. And they didn't actually make it exact 90-degree aspect. Saturn has now left Aquarius and gone back into Capricorn, and the market rebounded. There's been a recovery. Well, not a full recovery, but most markets have now pretty much reached a point at which I think they lost about 40% of the market value. The FTSE has now regained over 20% of that fall already. And I believe it's trading at this point right now. I believe it might even come a little bit higher. So I've said, you know what, before we go into 2021, the markets will start. The bottom of that point is where it's currently trading. It may not have another orb. I'll make further videos explaining the short-term market analysis in the previous week, which is July 2000, around 14th of July 2020 to 16th and 17th of July. The markets may have reached their short-term crest. So depending on which market we're looking at, we may have already reached our peak, which I've tried to show in green here. And I believe as we go into 2021, we're going to see another drop in most markets. Now, that drop can be as low as the previous drop that we saw in all the markets. So you can do some trend analysis and look at what was where did the market bottom out in March, around March 23rd. That drop can reach the same point. If not, it may go lower. And I've tried to show that where I believe, how deep I believe the markets may drop for the FTSE in this graph. So it's this red circle shown here. It can go anywhere between the top of the circle to the bottom of the circle. The reason that it won't go any lower than that is we have our trend line, our 18-year trend line going across the bottom. It's a support line. I don't believe it will fall below this point. And if I look at what sort of point are we talking at? It's around the 5,000 mark. It shouldn't, the FTSE shouldn't drop that far below the 5,000 mark. And I believe the markets will then recover. Now, they're unlikely to hit another market high before we go into the primary trough, but they may reach previous highs seen as part of this recovery. So perhaps I should have drawn this green circle with the bottom of it coming down a little bit more to around here, but we will see a rebound in the markets. Nowhere, it will not, I don't believe it will reach the top there. It will not, definitely won't reach highs seen in February 2020, but it may, if you follow the trend lines, it may get as high as the highs we saw around early June 2020. And then we're going to see another drop into 2026 and 2028. So this is the long-term forecast that I'm trying to share with you here. So whilst we've seen a rebound in most markets since March 2020, I would expect that most of the markets are now going to drop below the levels that we've seen during 2021 and 2022 as a secondary market trigger of Uranus and Saturn going to a square aspect. And when will these square aspects actually take place? So this is Saturn and Uranus. You can see they're going into a square aspect shown by a red square. The first aspect is 17th of Feb 2021, followed by the second square aspect as the two planets go into retrograde on the 14th of June 2021, and the final square will be 24th of December 2021. The reason I said 2022 is always allow a big orb. If you imagine, the first drop we saw was around March 2020. That's a year before this first aspect actually took place. So it can go on till middle of 2022 as well. Allow a wide orb. They're two slow moving planets. And then the primary trends show us that we would expect the markets to bottom out between 2026 and 2028. The exact dates that the North Node enters Aquarius is the 18th of August 2026, and it will come out of Aquarius on the 7th of March 2028. So during that period, we would expect the markets to bottom out. So these are the key periods to look out for if you have any investments. You may think, well, I don't really follow the markets. This doesn't relate to me. I think we should all be wary and use this information when we're trying to make any form of investment decisions, whether it's properties, or if we do have portfolios that we're trying to build, or even if you have a pension, because most pensions are being invested on your behalf. I'm not a financial advisor, so I would speak to your financial advisors or find one if you don't already have one, and ask their advice about what you can do to protect your pension against any movements in the stock markets. When markets are at a high, it's a good period to look at selling a lot of stocks and shares that are being held as part of your pensions and investing in more secure bonds and potentially gold, or just keeping it as cash and waiting for a market crash to come about. And that's a great time then to actually start investing into the stock markets. So even if it's something that you've never done and maybe interested in, I would encourage you all to look at opportunities for coming into the market, not at the highs, but at the lows. And the best time to come into the stock market are the two periods that I'm trying to show to you. You don't have to be an expert. You can buy indices, so you can actually buy the index for the FTSE 100. You'll gain diversification by doing that, and you can buy into other indexes, which I'll explain in other videos. It's pretty simple to do, it's pretty cheap to do, and it doesn't really take a huge amount of knowledge. But my first rule has always been with investments of this type, because they are high risk, don't invest that much, don't invest more than you're completely willing to lose, or at least leave in there and not touch for a long period of time. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter when you come into the market. If you're happy to wait and have an investment period of 18 years and over, things will always recover and will continue to grow over time. So I would say, having explained all of that, I will make another video looking specifically at this Saturn-Uranus square aspect happening in early 2021, because it's going to be repeating a pattern that happened around the year 2000 with the dot-com crash, and I believe technology markets will be hit more specifically. But as we enter the next cycles, and as we know, the great mutation is happening at the end of 2020, where the great conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn are happening in air signs. The next class of assets to look at investing into are technology, communication stocks, and soon we'll see more and more stocks dealing with space travel and telecommunications in satellites. So look out for these. Look out for the bigger companies. When markets drop, look at big companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, and you don't even have to invest in specific companies. You can invest in an index like the Nasdaq, and there are a few of them around. Again, I'll try to explain these in videos further down the line. Hope that you've enjoyed this. My name is Puyan Zolfagania. I'm sharing these videos with you all just to, I don't really have any vested interests. I find them interesting. I use them in my own personal investments, and I believe this knowledge should be available to all of us, and we shouldn't necessarily have to pay for it. It is an ancient knowledge, and I hope it will help you in your lives. Take care for now.